Okay, this is going to be very different from the normal type of videos that I make. Usually I talk about Ponytown or My Little Pony or things similar to those, but today I want to talk about cartoons in general. More specifically, how cartoons shaped me into who I am today and how cartoons affected me and things like that. Cartoons that I saw as an 8-year-old and the way they affected me as like an 8-year-old and how they still affect me to this day. Because of my lack of experience in this type of video, I don't really know where to begin, so I think I will just list these different cartoons out and what they did to me. Maybe it'll still be like some kind of weird version of a story time, or maybe it'll be some other thing, I don't know, but what better place to start than just to list out everything I watched growing up. And probably more, but then where would this video be? Of course, there is plenty of live action shows like Drake and Josh that I used to watch all the time, but how did these cartoons ruin me? Or, well, to put it more simply, how have these cartoons shaped me and how have they made me act throughout the years? Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends made me want an imaginary friend so badly. I never had one before watching this or after watching this, but I wanted one so bad one day after watching this show that I just pretended to have one, if that makes any sense at all. It's kind of weird because that's kind of the whole point of an imaginary friend, is that you're pretending that you have one, but it's confusing, but that's what I did. I went to school one day and I pretended that my imaginary lizard friend was coming with me. He was a green 3 to 4 foot tall lizard thing that was in a suit. He wore a suit, I don't know why, and I would tell people not to sit on him and to treat him fairly and nice and stuff. I tried my hardest to sort of visualize him into this reality, but it just really wasn't working, it wasn't happening, and so after a single day I just kind of threw that away and I never mentioned Mr. Lizard ever again. But the whole thing was Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends' fault, because I wanted a cool friend so badly that I thought, what if, in my head, even though in my head I was also like, yeah, but it's a cartoon, so it's not real, but what if though? Like, what if? So it was like a whole thing. Ed, Edd and Eddy made me love cartoons probably more than any other show I had ever watched before. Watching that show, you know, growing up, I was so fascinated how it was created and everything like that, and I wanted to do something like it. I think it was the style of the show, the way that they were always moving no matter what, that made me really like the idea of like making a cartoon one day, because it was so imperfect and I liked that. I don't know what it was about it, but it made me want to create a cartoon so badly, which probably ultimately led me to drawing more often. But speaking of drawing, Chalk Zone is one of those shows that made me doodle more than pretty much any other show ever. In Chalk Zone, the main character had this special chalk that would let him visit a world where chalk drawings live. I wanted so badly to go to that world, or so badly to talk to my drawings or something like that, but ultimately this just led me to thinking more about the world and universe of each of my drawings and characters that I create, and how they lived in them. So in a way, it kind of made me a better writer, because it made me think more about the drawing instead of just, haha, funny character. There were a few small certain shows that did like small things to me or affected me in small ways, such as Rocket Power making me like skateboards and stuff like that, or LT Grade making me reflect on my own morals of what I think is good and bad, Courage the Cowardly Dog and Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy making me love creepier things and finding a style through that. Shows like Teen Titans, TMNT, or like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Iron Man Armored Adventures, etc., making me love the idea of superheroes, which to this day is something that I am probably like way too into. They also made me want superpowers, of course, so of course I pretended to have these superpowers, and I tested them myself if I actually had any. This was probably more due to Avatar: The Last Airbender and their powers and stuff like that. But still, I to this day, I catch myself trying to do these different motions and weird things to try and activate these powers that I logically know I can't possibly have because they're impossible. But, like, what if though, right? Code and Lyoko made me love computers and sci-fi and stuff like that way more. It got me interested in technology and the sci-fi genre and all that stuff. Static Shock and other shows like it for teaching me about acceptance of all races and cultures and peoples of all kind. Then there is like the heavier offenders, or ones that affected me more negatively. No cartoon in particular did this, but it's something that happened as a result of different cartoons and live action shows and stuff like that. And this main one is that I'm terrified of aliens and sleeping to some extent. More specifically, I'm terrified of being woken up by some kind of monster or an alien or a demon or some kind of crazy shit like that. Although more recently I fear much more than monsters, but that's like a whole other story. There is one show that has affected me so badly that it's created a habit that has persisted even to this day. And that show is Ben 10. Ben 10 was one of my favorite shows ever when I was a kid, and for those that don't know, Ben 10 is about someone who gets an alien watch that lets him turn into different aliens. You may be wondering, what habit could I possibly picked up from this show? What could I have possibly picked up from this show that made me do this weird habit all the time? Well, it's made me fiddle with any watch I've ever worn, or pretty much just anything on my wrist at all. I will just sometimes just like fiddle with it, like I'm turning the dial on the Omnitrix from Ben 10, or sometimes I'll even press down on it like I'm activating it. And I do this subconsciously all the time. I'll just be talking to someone if I have a watch on, or even just without anything on my wrist at all. I'll just be talking and I'll kind of like subconsciously move around my hand on my wrist like I have some kind of Omnitrix on that's not even there. Like I said, it's kind of bad in the sense that, like, I might not even be wearing a watch and I'll just do it anyway. It's so weird, and it also makes me kind of want to always be wearing something on my wrist, which is another weird thing about it. I mean, my wrist also feels and looks kind of weird sometimes when I look at it and see nothing. I mean, I haven't even worn a watch or a wristband or anything like that in a very long time, and it still feels and looks weird to not have something on my wrist. I don't know how all of that happened, or if it ever will stop happening because it's like a habit or whatever, but it hasn't necessarily resulted in anything bad happening, and it's not really hurting anyone, so I don't really care that much about it. But it does affect me, and it is one of those things that has affected me even to this day. But everything I watched growing up has affected me in some way or another, and the truth is, whatever you watched growing up or are watching as you're growing up is probably affecting you in ways that you don't realize. People usually make fun of cartoons or TV shows or whatever for being dumb little shows or time wasters or whatever else, but what a lot of people don't understand is that cartoons actually affect people and society as a whole. That's why people of color or people in the LGBT community want to see themselves represented in media like cartoons, movies, etc., because the more gay people, non-binary people, people of color, people of oppressed groups, or people of certain cultures are represented in media, the more normalized it becomes. The more kids can grow up learning that it's a pretty normal thing despite what their parents might say or what their teacher might say. They can see that the rest of the world is totally okay with it and treats it like anything normal. Because it is normal, and it normalizes things that shouldn't have to be normalized. And that's good. That's a good thing that it does that. It works the same way that propaganda does, and that's the reason why propaganda is so effective. And that propaganda is, again, the media's fault. Past generations grew up watching cartoons and TVs and shows and movies and all this other stuff that were horribly racist and homophobic and whatever else. And just look at the past generations. A lot of them are those things. You have to be careful letting younger people watch YouTube unattended as well, because YouTube is just as effective as any other cartoon or form of media. Whatever they watch will affect them for better or for worse. So whatever you take away from this video, if you take anything away from it, remember that cartoons and TV shows are more than just cartoons and TV shows. They are forms of media that will affect the next generation that's growing up and watching it. So what do you want to show to the next generation? Wow, okay, so this video took a weird turn there at the end, but I hope you enjoyed it regardless. I hope you found this informative or helpful or just fun to any degree. And if you did like it to any degree, I would sure as heck love it if you guys were to like, subscribe, share, and do all of those wonderful things like that. Because not only do you get access to wonderful content such as this when you do that, but you also get to become wonderful yourself, and I think we all want that. So do those wonderful things, and until next time, stay wonderful.